An Italian painter and mosaicist, Cimabue played a significant role in Italian art in the late 13th century. With an interest in classical Roman drapery techniques, he had a direct personal influence on painting in Florence, Tuscany, and perhaps even Rome. None of the works completed by the artist are signed. His earliest attributed work is a crucifix done for the church of San Domenico. Cimabue painted with all major mediums of the medieval period, including altarpieces and crucifixes done with egg temper on panel, frescoes, still a new technique at the time, and mosaics. However, there is no indication that the artist worked with manuscripts. Around 1277 to 1280, Cimabue was commissioned to paint a series of frescoes in the Basilica of St. Francis, the main church of the Franciscan order in Assisi, Italy. The church was a popular pilgrimage site in the Middle Ages as it held the tomb of St. Francis. Both the upper and the lower churches are decorated with frescoes completed by major medieval artists. Sources suggest that there could scarcely have been another choice of artist for the decoration of the choir of this enormously important new church, for Cimabue was unquestionably the leading artist of Florence, if not all of Italy, in the 13th century. Inspired by the Golden Legend, a medieval bestseller which gave an account of the lives of saints and popular interpretation of Christian beliefs, Cimabue incorporated many of these details into his frescoes. The theological text would have likely caught the attention of the Franciscan monks who commissioned Cimabue, and thus the ideas would have been welcome into the artwork. Cimabue's frescoes can be found in the crossing and sanctuary of the upper church. Some believe these frescoes may have been his greatest masterpiece, although the badly damaged state of some of the scenes makes the images difficult for others to appreciate. Throughout the upper church, it is challenging to distinguish the individual artist's work from that of his workshop. However, each fresco is attributed directly to Cimabue. While the damage of the frescoes may be significant on the surface, underdrawings are still visible in many scenes, allowing one to see the outlines of various figures and shapes. Iconography of the compositions also remain visible, as the viewer is still able to make out ornamental motifs, geometric patterns, floral elements, and borders. Cimabue's frescoes are not a continuous narration, but rather a collection of related episodes. Beginning in the apse, there are 8 scenes from the life of the Virgin. On the lower part of the wall, flanking either side of the papal throne, are 4 scenes from the Virgin's later life. This set of frescoes includes the death of the Virgin, the Dormition, the Assumption, and the Triumph. In each of these scenes, Cimabue includes architectural cornices, a motif that will become popular among Cimabue's followers, especially by the artist Giotto. The first fresco, the Virgin bidding farewell to the Apostles, is found in the apse of the upper basilica. This work is also commonly referred to as the Death of the Virgin and the Last Hours of the Virgin. Mary is surrounded by the Apostles as she lays on her deathbed. Cimabue paints John as the only standing figure, announcing the Virgin's death. John is placed under 2 arches, with his halo being partially covered to show spatial representation in the scene. By placing all the figures inside of a loggia, paired with arches and Corinthian columns, Cimabue pays close attention to the innovation of spatial representation. He crowds figures into the lower half of the scene around the Virgin's bed. Following the text of the Golden Legend, Cimabue paints 3 lamps hanging from the middle of the composition. The second scene is the Dormition of the Virgin, which is unfortunately in poor condition. Cimabue again paints similar architectural structure into the composition, but this fresco does not have the same spatial definition as the beginning scene. The left side, the most damaged side of the fresco, originally showed the Virgin on her deathbed, although it is now difficult to decipher. Hovering around the Virgin is a large group of figures referred to as the elect. Overall, the scene is quite overcrowded with angels in the corner, patriarchs, and finally Christ receiving the Virgin's soul. The placement of the figures is intentional, as it suggests the idea of intimacy between death and resurrection of the soul. Adding these various figures also shows Cimabue following the literary text of the Golden Legend. While he draws inspiration from this literary text, Cimabue also includes many traditional Dormition elements, such as Christ holding a small figure representing Mary's soul. The Assumption of the Virgin fresco is also not in ideal condition, though not as badly damaged as the previous scene. Here, Cimabue splits the composition into 3 different horizontal sections. The lowest contains Mary's open tomb with a garment draped over the edge and apostles on either side of it. The middle scene includes 3 separate groups of haloed figures: patriarchs, martyrs, and confessors. The upper scene is the most significant of the fresco. Christ and the Virgin are seated in an oval-shaped throne supported by 4 angels whose bodies expand horizontally across the composition. Although it is hard to make out, the Virgin is cloaked in a glorious garment with star-like detail. Unlike the Assumption scene portrayed in the Golden Legend, Cimabue seems to have drawn more of an inspiration from the resurrection of the soul of the Virgin, which included more figures, although an empty and open tomb is more true to an Assumption scene. The final fresco in this Virgin series depicts the Virgin's triumph, also referred to as the Virgin and Christ enthroned. Not in the best condition, many of the images, or at least their outlines, are still visible. As it is a typical portrayal of the 2 on the throne, Mary is shown at the right hand of Christ. She extends her right hand towards a group of witnesses, representing her role as intercessor. In this scene, however, Cimabue seems to place a larger emphasis on the composition's spatial elements. The several steps on the throne have arched forms, suggesting a more 3-dimensional aspect. In addition to this, there seems to be a significant amount of depth and movement throughout the scene. Onlookers surrounding the throne are on the same parallel plane as the throne, and seem to emphasize the downward movement of the work. Cimabue is also said to have presented these figures as members of a congregation to draw the viewer into the scene. He also linked them to the Franciscan monks. Aside from the poorer condition of the frescoes, this Virgin series clearly portrays Cimabue's expertise skill as a painter in the 13th century. Working with traditional iconography, the artist also included innovative techniques and motifs into his scenes. Had the composition survived the natural elements and been properly preserved, the works would indeed have represented some of Cimabue's best work. Depicting the life of the Virgin Mary, Cimabue worked with a very significant topic of his time. As the work was commissioned by a religious order, the monks would have taken very seriously to these scenes. Drawing directly from a major theological literary source allowed Cimabue to have artistic freedom within the compositions without going too far out of context. While the Virgin scenes can be confusing due to the deterioration of the images, they represent a fascinating piece of Italian Gothic art.